All right, everybody, welcome. This Wednesday afternoon, we're back after a week's hiatus to the Kingdom in Motion. I got my guests in the studio with me this afternoon. I am really looking forward to this conversation. With no further ado, let's see everybody's face. One, two, three. This is the big reveal. Everybody all smiles. Well, let's try this again. One, two, three, big reveal, all smiles. And there we are. There we are. Thank you so much for coming on. So let's, let's go straight into some introduction so we can make the most of our time today. To my immediate right on the screen, I have Councillor Ahsan Khan from the Waltham Forest Borough, who's taking time out of a very busy schedule to be with us today. I appreciate that. And also to the bottom of the screen, in that's just the way the software put everybody's faces. We have Michelle Johnson, who was on the show with us 2 weeks ago when we had the interview with Councillor Osho, and she's gladly or she's graciously come back to be a part of this conversation today, and I am so grateful, Michelle. You guys want to say hello to everybody?
Well, hello. I am H. Michelle Johnson, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. I'm a concerned citizen, so I'm here as a citizen.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Khan, do you want to say hello to the folks?
Hi all. So my name is Councillor Ahsan Khan, Cabinet Member for Community Safety in Waltham Forest Council. Pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you very much. So this is where I would usually ask everybody to introduce themselves and say what they do, but you guys are kind of taking that question out the window with that very succinct, concise hellos you've just done. So I'm going to go to you, Councillor Khan. Could you you tell us what it means to be a councillor? One of the things I found out as a faith leader and a community leader is a vast majority of our population have no clue how the political process works. So they know about the general elections. They know about the prime minister, usually the most infamous person in Britain, and they may know a couple of MPs, maybe members of the parliament, but they have no clue, especially how the local government works. So
Mhm.
could you explain to us what your role entails and how that fits in as part of the government?
Right, fine. So I'm, of course, a councillor of a ward within Walthamstow, which is in Waltham Forest. It's called Hoe Street Ward. So I am elected by the people within that ward. So I have an electorate of around 11,000 people in Hoe Street Ward. And every 4 years, the people go to the ballot box and decide to elect their local councillors. That's very different from, of course, the general election, which is held every 5 years. The local elections are held every 4 years. My job is to represent the people within Hoe Street Ward, as well as there will be issues that I'll represent people right across Waltham Forest. So ahead of the election, I'll set out some of my key pledges, such as air quality, improving the housing, and people will then make a decision whether to vote for me or vote for people in other parties. So I was elected in 2010. There is no limit to how long you can be a councillor, and primarily my casework involves very local issues. So that's where I have influence. A councillor has influence at a very micro level within a ward, in a borough, or influence across the whole borough. So casework issues, just some examples. Housing is probably the biggest casework I receive. People who are living in inadequate housing, unsafe housing, overcrowded housing, they come to me as their local councillor and see where I can help them and hopefully get them rehoused. People get in touch with me around school admission sometimes. Thankfully, that's now, that's not as big a sort of casework load as we used to have. So we seem to have done well as a council around some of the issues around schooling. Potholes in streets, street lamps not working, issues around local parks, the planning process. So, whether you're carrying out work on a residential development or whether there's a commercial development, councillors have a say in the planning process. So we can speak to planners and suggest to them what we would like to see in our area, and what we think doesn't quite fit within our area. So we can make them representations. So that's just a flavour. Just the final point I want to make is, at a local level, local councillors, whether you're a councillor or you're a cabinet member, they have real influence, and really should be representing you, showing leadership on issues within the community, and making representations in the council. They should be accessible, of course. So for me personally, I try to respond to emails as quick as I can. I'm on Twitter, on Facebook, and my mobile phone number is available on the internet, on the council website. So it's about being accessible, and there are no set hours in your working day. It's very flexible. You can have some weeks where you're working up to 60 hours. You could have some weeks where you're working 20 hours. So it's a mixed bag. Hope that's helpful, Israel.
It is very helpful. Thank you very much. Somebody let me know privately that my microphone was kind of low. Could you guys just let me know that you can hear me loud and clear now before I carry on?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So, by the way, for those of you who are, especially because I know we've been away for a week, it feels like an eternity, but you know the drill. You can ask your questions in the comment section. We will spotlight some of your comments as we go along, and you can say whatever you want, as long as it's not abusive or vulgar. So we promote freedom of speech in the comment section. You can agree with what's being said. You can disagree. Just keep it respectful, courteous, and keep it non-vulgar. If you have questions for either the councillor or Michelle, you put them in and we will ask them. And if we have some time at the end, we will do what we did 2 weeks ago, where we might give a couple of you a link to actually come on the show directly and ask the questions or say what you want to say. So, Councillor, thank you very much for that. And because I must confess, I used to be one of those people up until about 10 years ago. I was so interested in national politics, I had no clue what went on at my local level. And about 11 years ago, when I pastored my first church, so the first church I was the senior pastor of, that was what kind of opened my eyes to see that at least a good section of what the things people complain about, want to see fixed, done, the issues they have, don't rest with the national parliament. They rest at the local level. Unfortunately, like you said, the elections are once every 4 years. Most people don't vote in council elections. The turnout is quite low compared to general elections. And I know many people who never met their councillor, don't know who his name or her name is, don't know what party they represent, or even a part of the electoral process. But then when it comes time to deal with the issues that are at stake at the local level, we have the loudest voice. And so one of the things I'm hoping with these series of conversations we can do is just initiate people into a little bit how local government works, whether or not they agree with it, and then they can engage. Because I'm sure you would agree with me that you would rather have people who disagree with you engage than...
Absolutely.
Go on.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Israel. And just to sort of, whilst I'm here, in terms of people who may be interested in, seeing on the ground what a councillor does, I'm happy to mentor anyone, who would want to shadow me once we're out of COVID, in terms of meetings I attend, my surgery, for example, just sort of a week in the life of the councillor, daily life of the councillor, whatever is appropriate, whatever. Once just get a sense of what we actually do. And Israel, just one point I would make, just adding to what I was touching on earlier, one really important point of local government is being advocates and lobbying regional government, the GLA, for example, the London Assembly, or lobbying government around specific areas, for example. So, what we see is lots of regional inequalities around funding. So local councils are usually at the forefront of lobbying for extra resources for their local area. So that's the lobbying angle, that connection between government and local government. It's a lobbying connection, working in partnership sometimes. So there is lots of working jointly with these different public sector bodies across the country.
Awesome. I was grinning from ear to ear. I don't know if you saw that, because I will take you up on that offer, if not for me, for the people. I've just started a marketplace mentorship community for people of faith, most of them of Black and minority ethnicity who want to be engaged in civil and uh, marketplace life. That's the buzzword we have on this
Right.
side of the fence. And so I'll be in touch, Councillor Khan, to take you up on that offer once COVID is knocked on the head. So Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, and where your concern as a citizen is birthed out of?
Yeah, thank you very much, Israel, for inviting me on the program. It's my pleasure, as I say, to be here. So I am H. Michelle Johnson, and I am an author of a book called Do Great Exploits, Saying Yes to Your Dreams When It's Easier to Say No. But I'm also a speaker, a coach, in my sort of part-time life. Full-time, I work for the NHS and I work in communications. I'm head of communications and stakeholder engagement in one of the main NHS organizations. And so I'm all about engaging people, engaging communities. And I'm thrilled really with your guest and what he was saying earlier in terms of, wanting to encourage citizens, ordinary people to actually get involved in local government, engage with their local politicians. And I also want to take my hat off to you, Israel, for this program and for that group that you just mentioned, the Marketplace group, because I am a strong advocate of the church getting involved in politics, getting involved in the marketplace. I feel that the church shouldn't retreat behind its walls. We have a place in society to bring our views, to get involved in the conversations and to steer perhaps some of the conversations towards some of the values that we hold as the church. So all good. In terms of my concerns, I suppose, and it's quite interesting because I just came off of a meeting, part of the Equality and Diversity Steering Group where I work. And, COVID has really shone a spotlight on the deep inequalities that have been in existence from time immemorial. So these inequalities are not new. COVID didn't create them. COVID shone a light on them. And my view has always been that it is really time now for the systems in which we live and operate to change, to take note of the high volume of data that has been collected for decades around inequalities and begin to change its approach to the way our services are run, our services are provided, in terms of access and enabling people to fulfill their potential, as opposed to a system where people's potential is curtailed and limited because of systemic prejudices and racial biases. So that, in a nutshell, hopefully answers all the questions that you asked me about who I am, what I do, and my concern as a citizen.
It sure does. Thank you very, very much. That was nice and concise. I like that. So let's get into it. One second. What did people say in the comment section? She's a great coach. Highly recommend. Well, there you go. There's some free advertisement right there.
Thank you, whoever that was.
I've got some free advertisement as well. The Marketplace group is fantastic. It is fantastic, guys. It holds every Monday. Shameless plug. It holds every Monday at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I think I should have a flyer here. I don't. Do I? Let's see if I can find it. Yes, it's this one. So, okay, that's an outdated flyer anyway. But it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon every Monday. You should try it out. It's amazing. So, now, Michelle, you kind of kicked us off very nicely. So let's really get into it. Let's see. Okay, good. By the way, Jamie, if you're watching this, you deserve a raise. I'm missing my right-hand man when it comes to media, and it's amazing how you don't know how great people are sometimes till you have to soldier on without them. So, Jamie, I love you. Please come back. Right. So, you mentioned about inequality. Now, like I said a couple of weeks ago, because Councillor Khan, when George Floyd died, this show kind of took a swerve. So the first 10 days after his death, we were on every single day. It's supposed to be a weekly show. We were on every single day, dealing with issues around race, racism, and race relations. And my attempt was to be a mediator. Now, one of the problems of being a mediator is both parties usually think you're in bed with the other side. And so I was trying to tell people who are in positions of authority and people who are not ethnic minorities, kind of give them a bit of a background into how the minority population sees life. Hold a second. There we go. Okay, Councillor Khan, you have your own free advertisement right there. Somebody thinks you've done a great job in Waltham Forest. So we're even. It's one apiece. You can't say we're not about equality on this show, can you? So
And we have very good diversity, I have to say.
we do.
Because we've got female representation, male representation,
we do.
a range of ethnicities as well. Well done.
Thank you very much. To God be the glory for that. On the flip side, I was trying to speak to my community. And when I say my community, as in case anybody missed it, I'm black, right? Right. I'm black. 100% and proud. Just remember that when you disagree with me sometimes, right? Okay. I'm not a sellout. I'm not an Uncle Tom, right? I'm not a house, NEGRO, whatever. I'm fully black. I've been black all my life. I've suffered racial discrimination. I've suffered racial violence. I've suffered career racial discrimination and harassment. I know what it's like to be an ethnic minority in the fullest sense of the word. I'm also an immigrant. I wasn't born in the United Kingdom. I moved here 20 years ago. So I have the full range of experience negatively of being this skin color. However, the people who share the same color as me and those who share the same faith as me sometimes need to understand that our reality is not obvious to everybody else. And rather than projecting our anger and our frustration, we should seek to communicate. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times where projection is very, very valid. You know, you push a dog, you kick a dog, you hit a dog, it will bark. But beyond the barking is to draw attention and say, stop, don't do that. You're going too far now. But if we want to see lasting change, we've got to stop barking, or in addition to barking, start having constructive stakeholder conversations that enunciate a position, a perspective that can be critiqued, and understand that not everybody will agree with us all the time. And in the words of, I've forgotten who said this now, famous quote, a good negotiation, he said, is one in which both parties leave slightly disappointed. So having said that, Councillor Khan, I'm going to come to you for a second. Michelle just mentioned about the data that's out there. And the truth is, it is out there. And anybody who doesn't want to acknowledge it, in my opinion, is just blind. Being an ethnic minority, and especially being a black ethnic minority, across the spectrum in many nations, means that we suffer disproportionately. Health, economic opportunity, family wealth, interactions with the police, investment in our school, in the school systems and the social services in the communities in which we make up the predominant number. Now, you are also classed as an ethnic minority, I'm right, Councillor, I'm right? So you're not completely distanced from this. In your position as a councillor, what's your take on this? Do you agree with the sentiment that people of that community feel disenfranchised? And if you do or don't, what's your take on it from the perspective of someone who's on the inside of government?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I'm just touching on Michelle's comments earlier in terms of the tragic murder of George Floyd, as well as the COVID pandemic, how it's now shone a light on some of the specific issues around racial disparities. And I think it's important to echo, again, someone who's on the inside of local government, the data has always been there. And, the data is available at local level, the data is available at a national level. The disparities, that data has been there. That's something I think we're very good at as a nation around the stats, the data, the evidence base. The gap has been the action plans to close, those disparities, to respond to the inequalities within the system. So there's no point having all of that data when no one has shown the political will to act on it. And that's, I would say cross-party. This is going back years. This is not only at the time of this current Conservative government. The data has been available around health inequalities, around housing inequalities, economic, social, the whole spectrum. The data's been there. So we really should have had, in my opinion, a lot more political will at a national level, because for me, at a local level, there is only a certain amount you can do to really make headway on some of these issues at a local level. It can be done, but the real action needs to be taken at the national level. And in my opinion, we need to have a model which absolutely looks at the data, reviews it, comes up with a strategy which involves a participatory approach for citizens across the country, for the groups that are affected. So in this case, the BAME groups, and in particular the Black groups. And then you have people feeding in through their lived experiences, and I think that's really important, to allow people to share their lived experiences, which helps to put together a much richer, focused strategy around how you respond to those inequalities going forward. And then I think you've got to have that genuine will to make political change, which means you develop a robust operational plan for how you respond over X number of years, and you set within that clear targets, monitoring, and then you review it in terms of progress, for example, every quarter at a very senior cabinet level, that cabinet level led at government. So in terms of, again, the politics for me is important here, because I think the government has the real teeth to bring about changes, not just in the public sector, but as well as the private sector, through legislation. And that's where I feel the government's recent response to some of the disparities that we're seeing, some the real focus that we've got on the data, has not, for me, it's not inspired me. I don't think we're really serious as a government around tackling some of these issues. The appointment of I think the lady's name was Munira Mirza to lead on some of these, looking at the inequalities and the structural racism. It's if you look at Munira Mirza's comments over many years, her views on these issues are very clear, and she doesn't think they're a problem in the UK. So why you would appoint someone to lead a review on structural racism and inequalities when that person is biased in their views? So there's a lot to be done. I'm really pleased with seeing that renewed focus through our politics and through our media. For me, the test is what tangible difference, what strategy is the government going to come up with that involves a participatory approach from the BAME community, and what that action plan looks like, and how is it going to be monitored.
Absolutely. So am I now unmuted? Good to hear your summary, Councillor. I guess, it goes back to that point too that we were making earlier when you described local government, and also Israel was talking about encouraging people to get involved in local government. So, this sense that local governments have limited influence locally in terms of the changes that they can make is concerning, and it probably speaks to the fact that the reasons why many people don't want to get involved, because they don't think that any changes can be made, any meaningful change can be made locally. And you're right, there's a national responsibility at national government level to take these things forward. But I just wondered, to what extent could local government, or what extent does local government influence national government and national policy? So
there is a really strong sort of lobbying angle. So, for example, from Forest perspective, when we talk about health inequalities, the funding we receive as a borough around health is a lot less than some of our neighbouring boroughs, some of the boroughs that have a similar demographic profile to us. And so we would be making the case to government around what is for us, funding inequalities. And that goes across health, it goes across education, as well as, for example, policing. So for us, it's very much a lobbying point. I don't in any way want to minimize the influence of local government. The point I'm trying to make is that the real levers for organizations such as the NHS and the police, the council has really limited levers around how we influence them organizations. We absolutely work with them in partnership. We sometimes do have shared strategies, but in terms of this specific issue around, the inequalities and the structural racism at a local level, from a local government perspective, I just think it will take us a lot longer to bring about some of those changes that we need to see, in my opinion, a lot more quickly. And I think the government will be able to, enshrine that in law and bring it forward a lot more quickly.
All right. Let's put a pin in that because I want to come back to that local national balance. Michelle, thanks for bringing that up. So, Councillor Khan, you said something that really touched a nerve with me in a positive way where you're concerned, but negatively elsewhere, about the fact that you cannot solve a problem if the people who you have assigned to find a solution do not, as a point of principle, see the problem as a problem.
Yeah.
I have refrained from talking about my own examples or my own encounters with racism on this show in the last 2 months intentionally, but this is a good place to bring one of them up. So about 2 years ago, then I lived on, so I probably was in your ward at the time? I lived on Mark House Road.
Okay, so that's the neighbouring.
Okay, so I'm just I'm one street away. All right, so I lived on Mark House Road. Of course, there's no parking on Mark House Road, which is one of the reasons I moved. I got tired of having to walk 10 minutes just to park my car and come home. And so I was circling the block looking for a place to park my car. Upon finding a place, while I was trying to get in, I had to basically reverse into the space. There were these two, when I say white, I'm not being racially discriminating, I'm just saying they were white, in a plumber's van behind me. They took exception to the fact that I was delaying them because I was trying to park my car in front of my house. Drove up alongside me once I was done parking, wound the window down, insulted me, called me every derogatory name under the sun with plenty of F-bombs, used the N-word several times. And while I was still kind of in shock at what just happened, parked the car, came down, one of them came down, came to my car and kicked off my side mirror while calling me an effing N-word. Now, I wasn't born in church, folks. So the like we joke, the black in me rose to the surface. I came down from the car. A 70-year-old lady who lived around the corner from me had to physically restrain me from going after them because he'd run back in the car in his van. And she kept saying, son, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You don't know what they have. They could be holding a gun, a knife, whatever it was. So while she was kind of blocking my path, a couple of other people in the area kind of came and helped her and physically restrained me and said, calm down, brother, calm down. It's okay. One of them said, relax. We got the plate number. You can call the police. So when I heard that, I thought, fine, hey, I got the plate number of the car, right? I'm going to call my local police. I mean, when we get tickets, when we get parking fines, the system is perfect at finding us, isn't it? I thought that same system will find these guys and bring them to justice. So I called the police. I gave them all the details. I was heaving and angry and frustrated and annoyed and demeaned and dehumanized. And they said, yeah, we'll look into it. 1 month later, The police tell me they're dropping the case. I said, why? This is what they said. We went and knocked on the door the van was registered to. No one answered the door. And because it's not a serious crime, we can't delegate any more resources to it. And I'm asking myself, if this man threw paint at the Prime Minister, you would find him. So the demeaning, the dehumanization, the sense of belittling, the emotional frustration, the emotional trauma that I went through doesn't count as a serious crime. In that moment, I understood what was wrong with the system. You're a white Caucasian police officer. You obviously cannot feel the pain I feel at having my property vandalized and being racially insulted because of the color of my skin. So the question I'm asking on behalf of everybody, then I guess to the government, and I know this is not to you, but you are the representation of the government here, like the police was, the district superintendent was last week, is how do we get the point across? So we're not shouting now, we're not looting, we're not burning anything down, we're not attacking police officers, all that's calmed down, we're not planning an uprising. But how do we as Black and other minorities get that point across to our government that this inequality, this second-class treatment is foundationally destructive to our well-being?
That's really sort of important testimony, and on a really important issue, which I know is, so many people across the country, I'm sure, can relate to your experience, and that's so concerning. So, actually, I'll link it back to the conversation about the role of local government, and say that within local government you have issues that are continually raised with you, and you raise them with national government, and you just don't see the rhetoric from the national level, or any action from from national government on those particular issues. And I'm alluding to hate and racism. It's something, so I'm the portfolio lead for community safety, and it's something that I was starting to see a lot more frequently, sadly, certainly across London, and the stats back that up. So we've seen an increase in hate right across London over the last few years. And so at a local level, we're sort of looking at what more we can do as local government to deal with these increases in hate we're seeing, and the concern that our residents are feeling, and your point around just feeling dehumanized by your experience. So we decided that we were going to commission a citizens' assembly on hate. So again, for those that don't know, it's very much a participatory model that is led by the residents of that area. So we had, we emailed out residents within Waltham Forest, and through randomized selection, we came up with 45 residents who participated in the hate crime assembly. And those participants would hear from experts in that area, academics, the police, teachers, various different institutions. And then the assembly would hear from people about their lived experience of racism and hate. And I attended many of the sessions for the hate crime assembly that was held just in February this year, actually. And it was a representative sample of Waltham Forest. So there was a good representation from BAME groups in that meeting, as well as from the LGBT community, from all different communities. It was very much representative of Waltham Forest. That's the whole purpose of that exercise. It's very much a bottom-up approach to developing policy. And what we heard through that, them 3 weekends of testimony was very similar stories to that what you experienced, and people talking about how they were the victims of racism, And when reporting it to the police, they were victimized again because the police didn't believe them. And that, that's just completely unacceptable. These are, the police, the institution we go to when we need help, when we're the victim of crime. And absolutely, they've got a responsibility to find the perpetrators and ensure that justice is served. So that that message in terms of the lived experience of reporting to the police came through really strongly in our assembly. The recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly were presented to the cabinet of the council only last week, and there's a whole load of recommendations, such as training for police. So we'll be writing to the police and saying, this is our feedback from our residents, this is what we think you need to do more of. Here's some of the anecdotes in terms of stories that came out from the residents' own experiences. There'll be letters going off to government around what more they need to do to strengthen the law around particular hate crimes. So there's a whole range of sort of recommendations coming from the community, which is not from the council. This is not from me. This is not from my colleagues in the council. This is coming from residents who've had a lived experience of hate and racism in our borough, and we're as a council taking that forward. And so we've earmarked some funding for some work we're doing at a local level around active bystander training, for example, as well as a high-profile borough-wide campaign around the impact of hate and racism on people's lives, and why it's completely unacceptable, and why we all have a role to go beyond tolerance and really become anti-racist. So there's going to be that whole campaign running across the borough. So it's one that we're trying to do. It's one that we're trying to show real leadership on at a local level. And my understanding is it's the first Citizens' Assembly on this particular issue on hate and racism in the world. It's never been done before. Citizens' Assemblies are usually used for constitutional issues such as parking and town centres. They're not really used for issues such as this, such as complex as hate and racism. So, it'd be interesting to see how the government and the different institutions respond to the recommendations that have come through the assembly. But again, it's just our what I think is our role as local government to try to show leadership on this issue, because we know it's a major concern in the life of our residents going about their business in Waltham Forest.
Awesome. Michelle,
Hello, I don't know whether you guys can see me or not,
we
but
can
I
hear
did
you, but we
drop
can't
out
see
for
you.
a bit. I'm not sure why that is. So I did miss some of what the councillor said because for some reason I couldn't hear you as well, and I've dropped out. I don't know if it was the internet, so sorry about that.
That's all
but
right.
I just wanted to respond really with 3 points based on the story you shared, Israel. And I heard some of what the councillor was saying. So I suppose 4 points. The first is obviously, very sorry to hear that happened to you. And yes, I've been a victim of being stopped by the police on 2 occasions for doing absolutely nothing except being black, driving while being black. Secondly, the big concern, I guess, to the councillor is that, it's frightening. It's frightening. And I work very hard on myself. I'm a coach and I have to coach myself to not get sucked into the fear that then makes you not want to leave your house. Okay? To drive your own car, which you paid for, to go to your local grocery or to go shopping or whatever it is, because you do not know what you might encounter out there. Okay? And that is something that, granted, you said you've run these engagement exercises and you've heard these stories, so I won't tell you the story again. And again, we go back to that initial observation on all our parts, that the data is there, the stories are there. We've heard them again and again and again, and they haven't changed. So what we really want, and Councillor, you did say this yourself, is to hear a response from the system that is different to platitudes that is different to blanket statements, for example, made by our prime minister, that kind of dismiss the real gravity of the impact that it has on ordinary individual people who are just trying to live their lives. Okay? And the thing is, based on Israel's story, this non-response from the police, all it does is gives fuel to hate crimes because people who perpetrate them know they can get away with them,
Yep.
right? So I think, as in government, locally even, I just feel that local governments need to put more pressure on the police to address and change their practices and policies. I used to be part of an independent advisory group to 2 boroughs in London to the police, local policing. And this is over 20 years ago. And it's just amazing that the same issues that were discussed back then are the same things being said again today. It is tiring, it is tedious, you feel it's pointless. But the thing is, it has come to a crisis point now. It's a boiling point now because we've all heard it, we've all said it, we've all seen the nonchalant reactions and responses from people who should be leading change for us, who we have elected, whose tax money, and our money goes into the taxes to actually produce services that work for us, that aren't working for us, okay? So that's my point, second point. My third point is, and this is to Israel. So I take exception to the phrase, the black in me rose to the surface, as a precursor to violence or aggression. This kind of way of speaking really does reinforce some of the stereotypes that are out there. I do not associate black as something that's in me, number one, but I also don't associate black with aggression. I don't associate black with violence. I don't associate black with any negative emotion or reaction or behavior or attitude or anything like that. When you see these negative attitudes, those are human reactions and responses. Every single race on the planet has those same responses. If you are treated with injustice, regardless of whether you're white, green, pink, or yellow, you are going to respond in anger. It is not a black thing. Yeah? We need to clean up the way we speak about ourselves as black people, the way we promote blackness, and stop feeding into those stereotypes. So those are the 3 comments that I wanted to make in response to that story.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I think, Michelle, I'm glad you said that. Let me clarify. I think you might have missed my tongue in cheek when I said that. If you remember when I said that.
Well, even if it's tongue in cheek, you did that. So I think you should
give me a second.
Give
me a second. I'll explain because you've actually touched on something that I wanted to bring up next. Is I made that statement from a sarcastic perspective to say that's the perspective from the outside. The black in this person is coming out. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Maybe I should clarify that. And I agree with you. Those
I still
stereotypes
find
are
it
wrong.
unacceptable. I still find it unacceptable.
Fine.
Whatever the explanation is, I find it unacceptable.
That's fine. I appreciate that. I'll just finish making this point though. That perspective from the outside of there they go again. There they go again. They're angry, they're shouting, they're raising their voice, the stereotype of the angry black man, the angry black woman. When a police officer says he felt his life was in danger because a black person wouldn't just put their hands behind their back without first asking a question. So Michelle, I understand where you're coming from, and if you felt offended by that, I apologize. But the point I was trying to make is the sarcasm was the outside world says that's a black person acting out without understanding, like Rido 2190 said, I love that comment, I'm going to put it up there, that the impact of racism is a public health issue. It can have severe effects on well-being and mental health. And that's the point. By when you see people act that way, whether they're black, like Michelle said, or white, or green, or pink, to use your words, which I found positively hilarious. It's a human nature. And I want to ask Councillor Khan this question. First of all, do you agree? And if you don't, you can disagree with it. If you do, then give me your opinion on what we can do to fix it. That whether it's police or it's legislation or it's criminal justice systems that need reforming, there seems to be an overexertion of resource, financial resource, human resource, and attention on solving the symptoms from certain community groups, and not enough given to addressing the roots that perhaps give rise to those symptoms. So, for instance, they will say that black communities or ethnic minority communities seem to have a larger percentage or larger representation of crime. The question is why? Why does there seem to be more crime in this part of the city? Could it be economic or lack of economic opportunity? Could it be poor investment in education? Could it be systemic racism and frustration? Could it be a perception that the system is rigged against me and therefore I need to fight back any way I can? I'm not, I want to make this very clear, I'm not agreeing with criminal behavior. I'm not agreeing with antisocial behavior. Like Michelle just said, stereotypes of violence or things of that nature are wrong. But my question is, should we as a government, and specifically as a local government, start to look beyond the symptoms and saying, there they go again, and ask, why is this happening? And if that's the case, can you give us some ideas of how we could go about doing that?
Thanks, Israel. That's really, really good question. So local government in that regard do have, a lot of work that they can do. So if I just give you the example of what we're doing at a local level, and then I'll touch on some of the government's response, and hopefully that will, I think, answer your question. Forest, what we've seen is, like the rest of the country, a huge rise in the violence across the board, all different kinds of violence. So violence against the person, violence with a knife, violence with gun. It has gone up right across the board. And again, that's a trend. That's not a Waltham Forest trend. That's right across London. And for us, we've got to make a decision around how do you try to respond to that increase in violence, which is having the knock-on effect of, obviously, sadly, people being killed. You've got victims of this violence. And it's making for people feeling really unsafe in their local area, fearful to go out, and making choices to move out the area because of some of the violence that they've seen. And then, they may have lived there all their life. So what we did was we commissioned a professor from Bedford, University of Bedfordshire, who was also a social worker, to sort of give us a map of why we're seeing this increase in violence and some of the root causes of what's driving this violence. And that report was commissioned in 2007, so we're going back a while. And it was called Dying to Belong, and it really gave us a good insight into what was driving some of that violence. So what I would describe as probably the determinants of crime. So, people, economic inequality, some of the points you made around structural racism, young children who had witnessed trauma in their household and were not given the support they needed in the early years. They were neglected by the system. They fell through the safety net, and then they went on to get involved in a life of crime, sometime perpetrator, sometime victim. So absolutely, you've got to look at some of those root causes. Just recently, we commissioned the London South Bank University to, again, because the 2007 study was a bit out of date now, so 2018 we commissioned London South Bank University, and they gave us a more up-to-date profile of some of the challenges we're facing. Again, the root causes were the same as what was set out in the 2007 report, issues such as exclusion from school, you know, just not that sense, wanting that sense of belonging and not feeling like you were part of the community in which we lived, the safety net, the support mechanism, just not there for young people. And what we were seeing in the 2018 report was the age of victims and perpetrators seemed to be getting younger. So that was very concerning. So as a council, we adopted a strategy through our violence reduction partnership. So we developed a violence reduction partnership, which brought together pretty much all agencies right across Waltham Forest. So we're talking about police, council, schools, hospitals, voluntary sector organisations, community groups, faith groups. So again, you know, just linking into the conversation earlier around the role of the church and faith groups more generally, I agree there is a much more of a role for the faith groups to be involved in local government as well as some of the national policies. So that was, you know, to my knowledge, one of the first sort of real areas that we focused on in terms of working with the faith community, who are part of the violence reduction partnership. So I think it's Bishop Peter Hill is a member of our is a member of the violence reduction partnership, and the main focus of the violence reduction partnership is looking at violence as a public health issue. So not how we, you know, send people to prison for longer, not how we, for example, stop and search more people. It's about how we as a group of organisations across the borough, how we understand what's driving that violence, what's the root causes, mapping that journey of individual young people sometimes to understand where there were mistakes by local government, where there were mistakes by other organisations across the borough, the missed opportunities, and how we could have helped young people earlier and hopefully had stopped them from becoming victims or perpetrators. That work is going on. The governance model that we've set up for the violence reduction partnership is you have all those organisations meeting and they feed into a young persons group that we have to hear again from a lot of the time, and I know it's sort of generalising violence at the moment, but our focus is probably a lot more on young people than it is on sort of adult violence. But yeah, just that real focus to ensure that young people's voices are at the heart of the governance model of the violence reduction partnership. So that's a very quick overview of the local work and sort of, again, the evidence base and ensuring the voice of the community is included within that. So that's what we're doing around the violence at the local level. At a national level, you know, I'm pretty disappointed with the national response, because what I see from government is this government that talks this really hard line about how they're going to increase prison sentences and, you know, speed up court proceedings to lock people up quicker and quicker. You know, this sort of strongman language that weirdly seems to win elections, actually. But you know, it's doing the populist thing rather than doing the right thing. And so, what we ended up with is cutbacks to local government. You know, the whole public sector, which has meant more and more people are falling through that safety net, which has meant you see a curtailing of civil liberties. And you have a society that just wants to see people, a society that just wants to feel safer, actually, and is happy to see people get locked up for longer and longer, despite them being young, despite them, you know, coming from very deprived backgrounds and being, you know, not really being helped by the system that should have supported them. So just a final point I would make is that the previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, commissioned David Lammy, who's the Tottenham MP, to do a review of why there was disproportionate number of BAME people in prison, in youth prisons, in just in the criminal justice system in general. And David Lammy sort of went away and over, I think it was 18 months, come up with a list of recommendations which have not been acted upon till this day. So that's for me an example of, again, like there's a report that sets out all the problems and the biases within the criminal justice system, yet it was commissioned by the government, so credit to the government for commissioning that piece of work by someone who's genuinely independent, who's got his ear to the community, yet they've not acted upon those recommendations. And in that report, I'll share with you some statistics. So I'll try to get it right, but I think it's between the BAME proportion of youth prisoners has.
Just for the record, when Councillor says BAME, he means Black and Minority Ethnicity, for those of you who may not know.
All right, yeah.
It's actually Black, Asian, and minority ethnic
Black, Asian,
groups.
and yes, thank you for. You're right, Michelle. Thank you for that.
Thanks for clarifying. So the BAME proportion of youth prisoners had risen from 25% to 41% between 2006 and 2016. And then just recently...
Could you say that again, please? Say that again.
So the BAME proportion of youth prisoners risen from 25% to 41%.
Wow.
In one decade, between 2006 and 2016. These stats are quoted in that report.
And what's the percentage of the entire population that's BAME?
It's a lot less.
I know, but I want to just compare. All right, carry on. I'll do some research here real quick.
There's a huge. It's a tiny population. If you listen to some of the
13%.
Oh, okay.
As at 2012.
Right. Okay. So that just shows you just how disproportionate it is. And then just following up on that, so that was between 2006 and 2016. In the last 4 years, we've seen that figure now increase to 51%.
Whoa.
So if I just go back now, so from 2006 to 2020, we've seen it go up from 25% to 51%. So it's gone up 10% in just 4 years.
Okay, so Councillor Khan, can I just pause you a second here? Forgive me, because I'm usually a stats guy. I did not know this one, and it's frying. It's baking my noodle, and I'm gonna give Michelle a chance to jump in on this because I'm sure she's got something to say about it. As with anybody who has a pulse, anybody who is human. Now, just for the record, I want to make this clear. This frustration is not directed at you, because you just giving me the figure anyway. So that makes you, for a lack of a better word, it makes you an ally in the cause. If you're highlighting the same thing, then I know that we're on the same side on this at least. But again, you are the first, or you are the representation of government in this conversation. So please forgive the frustration if it comes across in our voices or my voice. We've heard commission after commission, task force after task force, committee after committee, meeting after meeting. What can we do? Michelle, I'm trying to unmute you just in case you don't realize, because I want you to weigh in on this.
Okay.
At some point, where does the bureaucracy stop? And as a citizen, or as citizens, short of looting, burning, or a French-style revolution where we get the government out of power violently, which no one is advocating for the record. I'm just making that clear by. But when you hear people talk about these on the streets, these are the reasons why they justify that kind of behavior. And we rightfully condemn it. But in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., riot is the language of the unheard. What can we do to get this thing on the road to being fixed? Because Michelle said something. I moved to the United Kingdom almost exactly 20 years ago to the day. It was this month, 19 years ago I came. The exact same conversations we were having back then, we're having now. And you just told us it's getting worse. So obviously the commissions aren't working. The conversations, quote and unquote, aren't working. What can we do? Michelle, do you want to add to that before I let Councillor Khan respond?
Absolutely. And I think that's where we're at, is everything's been said and done. everything's been said and done. People have lost their lives. People have lost their lives. Many times, I point back to the fact, well, Martin Luther King was shot dead. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. What more? What more are we supposed to be doing? We have spoken, we have protested, we have shared, we have told our stories. What more? So the points I want to make, and again, it's not directed at Councillor Khan at all, because he is a BAME person as well. So his people are also on the receiving end as much as Black people are on the receiving end as much as this. So, Councillor Khan, I'm not directing these remarks to you per se, or personally, okay? But I just wonder how long, and I chuckled when Israel said, when does the bureaucracy end? Because actually that's what it is, it's just bureaucracy. What I wanted to ask is, how long do we need to research this issue? So the councillor mentioned that you had commissioned some research with South Bank University. So I'm like, why commission more research? Because it's not going to add anything new. And really, I would say it's a waste of taxpayers' money to keep doing research when there's nothing novel found, nothing new found on the back of that research. As a taxpayer, I would not mind some of my tax money being invested in research that is focused on the perpetrators of hate crimes and the perpetrators of racism. Those are the people that need researching. Those are the people whose stories need to be heard and told. Those are the people who need to be in these discussions. And I think it's a pity. I mean, we have Councillor Khan here, and that's fantastic. But actually, it would have been good to have a non-BAME person in this conversation to ask them some of these questions. Because it is not the BAME people who are systematically demonstrating and behaving in these ways. And that's not to say that all non-BAME people are racist or behave badly. I'm just saying that the racism, by and large, is coming from non-BAME people. And yes, even between BAMEs, there is some prejudice as well, but it's not on the scale as we see with the people who actually hold the power. Okay, so we need, if you want to do research and commission research with my taxpayers' money, can you please do it in an area that hasn't yet had enough research, not on me anymore or on my communities anymore, because we've told you everything. We even shed, our blood's been shed as a result of all this. Okay, so you have the data, you have those stats. What I want to find out is, what are you doing? So I understand that there's, local and there's national. And yes, there's a report that, led by, David Lammy and all of that. So, and the central government didn't act on the recommendations on that. But I just wonder, even at a local level, surely there's nothing to stop a local government from taking up those recommendations and implementing them on a local level. So I want to know, that's one question, is what have you done, or have your local government considered taking up those recommendations to do anything with them locally? And secondly, I would love to know, what are you as local government doing to mitigate against those shocking and alarming and shameful statistics with your local police forces, with your local schools? You know what? I think, you see, that research, if we shifted the focus of research onto the perpetrators and started to deal with their issues, support them in the way they need supporting, whether it's re-education, re-culturalization, or whatever it is, to help them, you will find that a lot of these outcomes, whether it's to do with school exclusions, whether it's to do with wrongful arrests, wrongful incarcerations, injustices in the system, will take care of themselves, because the system is made up of people, individuals, who then choose to behave in a particular way, who then, because of their biases, are more likely to refer people for disciplinary, or likely to call the police when a 5-year-old is acting up. I've heard that story as well. 5 years old, a child in the class acting up, and you phone the police for that child? So it's the system, but the system is made up of people. So it's, what are we doing to address the people who are not behaving in a way that is actually conducive to harmonious and living and just societies and what have you. But the two questions for the councillor is, have you considered looking at the recommendations from that report, the David Lammy report, to implement locally? And secondly, what are you as a local government doing to mitigate the statistics locally with local police? Those are the two questions.
Israel, do you want me to respond?
Please go for it, councillor.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Really helpful.
And I wouldn't want to have your job right now, so I'm going to be praying for you as you respond.
No, listen.
No, people are dying. This is, I get the funny bit, but listen, that's what I keep saying at work. You see all these policies, people are dying. People are losing their lives. It is that serious.
So just in terms of starting off with, in terms of as a local representative, as soon as you're, elected into a position of power, you absolutely have to be open to all scrutiny that's out there. So I welcome any questions. And I think that's, again, for those people who would ever consider standing for office, you've got to be completely open to all and any scrutiny, because like Michelle says, there's people's lives at stake here. So I think, I welcome all questions, and I think that's really important. In terms of the specifics, so the findings from the Lammy recommendation, we made a decision at a local level to do absolutely everything we can to adopt them at a local level. So we've, in a nutshell, yes, we are adopting those recommendations at a local level. As part of that, there's a whole load of recommendations aimed at police colleagues and how they go about their job in a more fair, just way, so that particular communities are not targeted. And so some of that conscious and unconscious bias isn't as prevalent as it is now.
That's lovely. Okay, so on that point, you said that there is something, did you say policies with the local police, yeah? Where's the accountability in that?
So the accountability, there's different forms of the accountability. There's public forums. So we have for example, stop and search group that's open to the public. The last meeting was 2 weeks ago. Because it's online at the moment, it's a lot easier for people to log in. There's the violence reduction partnership itself. That's some of the internal governance, and that's where you're going to see some of the data sets around action plans and the monitoring. So that's done through that board. And then you've got Safety Net, which is, again, a board that's chaired by the police that has representation from different agencies. And at that, so it's probably the most important meeting that the police sort of chair and lead on at a local level. And through that meeting is where we discussed the Lammy reports, and the recommendations were made to adopt them at a local.
Lovely. Okay, so what you just described is a bureaucratic response to accountability. When I mean accountability, I mean, has any police officer been fired as a result of this injustice, wrongful arrests? Who's got the biggest wrongful arrest outcome in a police force? Who's got the biggest number of complaints against brutality? Who's got the biggest number of wrongful whatevers? And are they being fired? Are they losing their jobs? Are they being disciplined?
Right. So in terms of that level of detail, that
Councillor, before you go on with that question, by the way, again, like I said, I wouldn't want your job here, and thank you very much for standing up to this scrutiny. Just for the record, yourself and our guest 2 weeks ago, the detective chief superintendent, I told him, and I'm saying the same to you, of all the guests we've had from the government in the last few weeks, and we've had a few, both of you have been, and Councillor Osher as well, have been some of the most open and least defensive, and we appreciate that. And it goes a long way towards building bridges, because when the community hear you answer and not give equivocations or defensive standard political speech like some other people have, they may quote unquote come at you a bit harder, but that in itself is a compliment, because they're saying finally someone is actually engaging. Right, let's get our chest off. Now, before you go on with that question, let me just repeat Michelle's point in a slightly different way. Let me give an analogy just so that it drives home to anybody watching, not you. Your empathy is not in question here because you've made that very clear in this conversation so far.
Absolutely. So as I did qualified myself to say, this is not against Councillor Khan directly or personally. I believe he's, we are all on the same side here. And these questions are more generic questions as well. They're not necessarily leveled at him or even his government. These are questions that we need to start asking.
It's the question people are asking in the kitchen tables.
Who is, where is? Can you just carry on with your life and your job and get your pay when you're suspended even? But that's not going to change people's behaviors.
Exactly. And so to give the analogy I was going to give, Councillor Khan, if I knew that the response for me stabbing someone was that a board would be called, an investigation into the motive for my stabbing would be commissioned for 6 to 12 months, there would be an internal review of why I used this particular knife and not the other knife, and 2 years later, after having been put at home with pay, I would be reprimanded about not stabbing again. If I wasn't a person of good conscience, every time someone got on my nerves, I'd stab them. Because there's no accountability. Now, if I know that if I stab someone, that review will be carried out with me in jail, right?
Yeah, on no pay.
On no pay, right? In essence, I would be treated like every other member of society. Then I would think long and hard about it. And whether it's police violence, which has nothing to do with you, your council member, or it's systemic racism, or it's discrepancies in the BAME population in the prisons, or investment in our communities, if the answer is we will have a meeting, it doesn't really dissuade. So what, you're going to talk about me, or it's like a child. I mean, growing up as a teenager, I nicked my mom's car a couple of times, I must confess. Mom, I love you. But back in the day, I wanted her car, she would say no, and I just nick it. Now, by the time I got to 17, 18, she wasn't going to hit me. She couldn't physically beat me. There was no male figure in the house who could exert physical will on me. And I didn't need her money. And so I made the calculation. If all she's going to do is natter and nag me and shout and complain, I'll nick the car. And so when again, we know you're on the same side here. I'm just, in case someone is watching who doesn't understand this on the level you do, what we're saying is, let's not clap at extra layers of bureaucracy. Yeah. There's a problem. We all know what the problem is. It's human nature. Some people are just bad human beings, period. There's bad human beings in the police force. There's bad human beings in government. There's bad human beings in positions of power. What can we do as a nation and as a people to deal with bad human beings? And I'm going to mute my mic now and let you speak, Councillor Khan. And I promise not to interrupt you.
Thanks, Israel. No, it's an important question. And it's not one that I have the answer to. In terms of the number of police officers that have been disciplined for misconduct, is what I'll probably describe it as. That's unfairly treating people in arresting them, or various other different ways in which the police come into contact with the public. So there's clearly more that needs to be done around sort of the disciplinary process for the public to have confidence in the police going forward. So I think for me, there's something about having those conversations, and I take the point about layers of bureaucracy, but it's for us as elected individuals to make that point to the police and say, this is the feedback we're getting from the community. They feel they're being treated unfairly, and they don't think you've got a proper misconduct process set out in the police. They don't think it's even worth complaining now because they know what the outcome's going to be. And then to, again, encourage people to share their experiences. So what we find is, you know, and I've spoken to people who say, we were stopped and searched, for example, it was a bad experience, but we didn't report it because there's no point in reporting it. And I know where they're coming from. But ultimately, we need them reports. It's so important. And that's, for me, becoming more and more prevalent. The number of people who are saying, actually, we're not going to report about experience because it goes into the black hole and we don't know anything about it, we don't hear back on it. And then if I just make the link to the US, which is, you know, the police in the US is in my opinion, in a much worse state. You know, I don't think the Met Police has got as bigger issues as the US, but they're not perfect. And if you
not
look
by a long shot.
the way in which the disciplinary processes took place against the officers in the US involved in some of those cases, it was only through movements that were cultivated at, you know, at a grassroots level within those particular towns and cities that led to, like, it was literally public pressure and, you know, the absolute surge on social media around particular incidents that happened to be videoed, which then led to disciplinary action against those officers. So, you know, I think the Met Police has to learn lessons from policing around the world, and, you know, really go back to a model which is focused on community policing and being very much part of the community that you police. And I just think, you know, for me, as part of that conversation, that you do need a police force that is representative of the people it serves. I think that's important. And so, again, my advice to the Met Police is that, you know, they need to do more around that whole agenda. I don't think there's enough women in the Met Police. I don't think there's enough BAME officers in the Met Police. And sadly, from what I've seen recently, of the senior BAME officers that I have spoken to and I've read about in recent weeks, they've not had a great experience in the Met Police. So, you know, there's an internal discussion that the Met Police really need to have, because confidence with the police, in particular in the BAME community, is not at a high. And it really needs some clear direction to get that confidence back from those communities that you're hoping to serve, certainly in London.
Absolutely. What you shared in terms of the BAME representation within the force, etc., is critical and very important, especially at senior levels, because we're seeing that same issue in the NHS. So, you know, maybe 6-7 years ago now, a piece of research is called Snowy White Peaks. You can Google it. What it showed, it was a piece of research that was commissioned nationally to look at well, equalities issues, really. But what it found was that, for example, for London, with its 50, I think it's, I can't remember the actual figures, but in terms of the numbers of boroughs in London, I think it's 30-something, 33, 32, 33 boroughs. With all the trusts that are in London, all the NHS organizations in London, and the fact that the BAME staff in London represented 45% of the NHS workforce in London, was 45% BAME. There were only 3 BAME chief execs in London. 3. And they found that when you go above band 7, there are lots of BAMEs around band 4 and band 5.
Wow.
Fewer at 6, fewer at 7. But pretty much 0 at 8. And that's why the research got its title Snowy White Peaks. So we're seeing that in the NHS, and policing, NHS, it really is a representative of society as a whole. So this is beyond policing, this is beyond NHS, this is beyond education. I'm sure it's the same in education. It's about what can be done with the people. It comes back to my point. The work needs to be done with the people who perpetrate hate in society, because those people are in policing, they're in education, they're in health, they're in everywhere. And often at power levels where they are deciding what happens, regardless of what policies might be in place, power still can circumvent a lot of policies. So it is about the human heart. It's about human nature, as Israel mentioned earlier on. And yes, it's beyond politics. It's beyond, things. But this is a human thing. And, it's, as a society, the conversation actually has to be as broad as that. Yeah, we know it's their organizations, there's policing, there's all these departments and divisions. But the fact is, you're going to have racists in all of them. And you're going to have BAMEs in all of them who have been affected by the racist policies and views, who have been limited in their careers or been subject to all sorts of unfair practices and so on. So I just think, I can only reiterate some of the things I said. We need to stop researching BAMEs. BAMEs have told their story. We know the story. We need to shift our focus from the non-BAMEs, or the BAMEs within the BAMEs who also are racist in their own ways, but to the non-BAMEs, to really say, look, what is it at the heart of this issue for you, that you can't treat other people who don't look like you with respect. You can't acknowledge them as human beings and treat them accordingly. To me, that is where the heart of this issue is. And very rarely, in fact, I'm the only one I've heard in various meetings, even at work, because I'm thinking, you know what? If you put me in the doghouse, it's all right, because I will just bring a mattress and make my doghouse comfortable. Because I cannot continue pretending that it is okay. Because, as I said, ordinary human beings are losing their life over this now. And not just now, but when you look at the outcomes in terms of health outcomes, people die younger. When you look at education, children are excluded from schools, which means their futures are ruined. When you talk about any department, the outcomes are very bad. So we just can't have these nice, sweet, darling conversations that don't offend and, cushion ourselves. We have to speak up on behalf of those who cannot speak up for themselves. We have to try very hard in our organizations and our spheres of influence to be the voice crying in that wilderness, to say, come on, guys, we can't play with this anymore. We can't be trifling with this anymore. If you're having a meeting at council level with your police involved, it's not sufficient. You need to actually find out what that representing officer is doing when they go back to the police station about the concerns that have been raised in that forum. You need to hear and see something followed up, and you need to see the outcomes change, not become worse going forward. It's just not right. It's not fair. It's not decent. It's not anything.
So I think just on that point, Israel, if I may,
Go on.
so I think what I've found in the time that I've been on the council is the discussions happening with, for example, police in this instance, at that board level, around the disparities, what actions are going to be taken. We're hearing all the right stuff. We're getting commitments. It all sounds great.
Yeah.
But 6 months down the line, the statistics are still stubborn. They've not moved in the right direction.
Yeah.
And for me, there's a problem between the strategic focus and embedding that in the organization. So
That's right.
You have the right people around the table. Ultimately, you've got to take that way and embed it in terms of practice in your organization. And that's not happening in the speed it needs to happen.
That's right.
We need to be a lot tougher around our monitoring, because unfortunately, despite the goodwill of a lot of people around those boardroom tables in council and police and NHS meetings, the statistics have not moved.
Changed. Yeah. In fact, they've gotten worse. So you're right.
The operational working of organizations, individually as organizations and across organizational boundaries, that we need to get better at embedding some of this learning going forward.
Right. Let me take the mic here for a quick second. So, Michelle, thank you for the education, because while you were talking, I went and I speed read the Snowy White Peaks report. Like I said, I'm usually the guy with these facts, figures, and citations. So when I hear one that I'm not aware about, I go brush up on it real quick, because. I wasn't going to go here today, but let me just say this, because like Michelle said, people are dying. Not just are they dying physically, they're dying internally. Mental health has been affected. A new generation is being born into the same ills that our generations have had to deal with. And at some point, you have to say, you know what? Like, I'm going to borrow that, Michelle. I'm going to bring my mattress into the doghouse and make it comfortable. Permission to use that phrase going forwards.
You're most welcome.
There is this dangerous school of thought, especially in the faith world over the last 2 years, that says, first of all, it's the turn the other cheek model. So just be a good Christian or good Muslim or good whatever. To those people, I would say, read your holy book again. I can speak for the Bible. It's full of social justice references and instructions. Secondly, that it is, now, as a person of faith, I do agree that I see myself first as a believer in Jesus Christ before I see myself as a man or a black or minority or whatever. That's true. That's my primary sense of identity. However, I was created this way for a reason. And it is not a violation of my faith. It doesn't mean I'm anti any other ethnic background to say this particular ethnic group or groups are being mistreated, and it is my responsibility to agitate for their welfare. So anyone who is preaching that rhetoric, it's not grounded in scripture, and I'd welcome them to a debate. Name the time or the place, I'll be there. Prove to me from any scripture, especially from the Christian Bible, that it is anti-faith to fight for the liberation of a demographic. Thirdly, using this, so I'm going to read excerpts from the executive summary of this Snowy White Peaks report. It is national policy that the NHS Trust Board should be as representative as possible of the communities they serve, and that this is likely to benefit the planning and provision of services. NHS Leadership Academy 2013. I agree. You can't lead any environment without representation from the environment. That's why I'm personally of the opinion, for instance, that one of the ways to help the police problem is create a rule that a police officer can't serve in a force that is a certain number of miles outside his home address. If he wasn't born there or doesn't live there or in the environs, he shouldn't be allowed to serve outside a certain rate. That's just my personal opinion. Because first of all, it will help them. It'll help the minority representation, because if it's a minority populated environment and you can only pick officers from that locality, you're going to have more minority officers. But secondly, when you're dealing with something that you live, a reality you live, you're usually a whole lot more sensitive. So I definitely agree with that point. It then says there's evidence that when trusts commission services, they often fail to cater to the most deprived communities, including black and minority ethnic populations. One of the strategies that trusts can use to mitigate, so first of all, that's a problem. The fact that somehow, this is the research saying this from the Middlesex University saying this, that they often fail to cater to the most deprived communities, including black and minority ethnic populations. My question, first of all, not to you, Councillor Khan, this is rhetorical, is why in the first place? But then they then say, one of the ways to mitigate this is to ensure decision makers are drawn from a diverse pool. I agree. The NHS recruitment processes have been shown to disproportionately favor white applicants. It cites the research. It then says previous research, which is cited again, has highlighted concerns about the absence of black and minority ethnic staff from senior NHS roles, including trust boards. 10 years after the launch of the Race Equality Action Plan, DH 2004, we carried out a survey of the leadership of NHS Trust in London to assess progress against this plan. London was chosen for this survey as a health region in which the relationship between the ethnicity of the workforce and the local population on the one hand, and the leadership of its health service providers on the other, might be worth particular attention. London is a city where 41% of NHS staff and 45% of the population are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. The report considers the extent of the gap between diversity apparent in the workforce and the local population, and that visible among trust leadership and senior management. That gap is then considered in the light of growing evidence about the impact of staff, and then it goes blah, blah, blah. So our findings: the proportion of NHS trust boards, of London NHS trust boards, from a BME background is 8%. 45% population, Black and minority. 41% population of the staff, Black, Asian, and minority. 8% members of the trust boards. It fell from 2006 when it was 9.6. So it's going down. Proportion of chief executives and chairs from a BME background has decreased from 5.3 to 2.5. Again, the population is 45% BAME, and the staff as a whole is 41%. I will then hazard a guess that if you cut off those top layers, you're probably going to have over 50% of the staff who are Black, or roughly. It goes on to say, 2/5, 2 out of 5 of London NHS trust boards had no BME members, executive or non-executive of them at all. In essence, they didn't even bother with tokenism. They didn't even say, well, let's get one Black person or one Asian person on here so we look good. They couldn't be bothered. While over half of the London trust boards had either no BAME executive members or non-executive members. Half. There was no significant change in the proportion of non-executive BME. Okay, that was covered by the previous point. I'm not sure why they repeated themselves. The proportion of senior and very senior managers who are BAME has not increased since 2008, when comparable grading data was available, and has fallen slightly in the last 3 years. The likelihood, this is the last one I'm going to call, the likelihood of white staff in London being senior or very senior managers is 3 times higher than it is for Black and minority ethnic staff. And that's per capita. They're not saying there's 3 times as many white people as Black people. They're saying per 100 white people versus per 100 Black people, you're 3 times more likely to be in that position of power if you're white. Now, when I hear this, and I hear people talk about how systemic racism doesn't exist, and people are just whining and complaining, and just be good Christians and teach the Bible and stop talking about this, and I'm like, go, like the kids would say, go take several seats. Michelle's right. There's a problem, and we don't need any more research to say there's a problem. We see this now. I'm seeing this in the NHS. I heard about it anecdotally. I didn't have this evidence. I have the evidence about the police force. I have the evidence about even politics. So, Councillor Khan, I'm going to ask you a very loaded question. And I'm going to pray that you have wisdom in how you answer this. I don't want you to be in the doghouse. I'm not sure if you want your mattress there with you.
I've got extra room in the doghouse, Councillor. You can move it.
And this conversation is going on around several. I can't speak about the Asian community, but I can speak about the Black community. This conversation is happening around several coffee breakfast tables. Do we just conclude that this system was built specifically to mistreat us? In which case, the system hasn't failed. It's just acting as it was designed. And if, now, whether or not you agree with that, but if that is to be the case, what non-criminal actions can we take to solve the problem that don't involve bureaucracy? Good luck, my friend, with that question.
Look, it's an important question, and it's one that you could write an essay on in all truth. But in a nutshell, my opinion is that within this country, the structures were built in a certain way, but through movements like we're seeing at the moment, there is the potential to really change those structures going forward. And we've got lots of allies who are non-BAME. I've never seen this many non-BAME people really get involved in a movement which isn't white, for example. Yeah, so what I've seen with the BLM movement, it's one of the most powerful movements I've seen in the time that I've been in politics. And the amount of non-black people getting involved in that movement is really good to see. Now, for me, again, it's great people are taking the knee. What tangible actions will they be getting involved in going forward to improve a lot of the discussions, to improve on a lot of the discussions we've had today, whether it's representation in boardrooms, whether it's the criminal justice systems, it's about what role they can play. And so, for example, I still have faith in the political system. I think what we need is people to not just see it as their civic duty to put their ballot in the box at election time. I think that's the absolute minimum in a democracy. And when I say a civic duty, within the BAME communities across the UK, we have some of the lowest rates of people voting. And so if you're not going to vote, then people will not cater for your needs sometimes, and that's the sad reality. But I think we need to go above and beyond just posting our ballots through the ballot box. I think what we need is a participatory democracy where we're all working in between elections, holding people to account, who should be standing up for you, who are not standing up for you, and making sure that you hold their feet to the fire. So I think for me, there's something about participatory democracy, and as part of that, you lobby for laws which encourage positive discrimination. So, for example, in the Labour Party, there's what we've done to increase the number of women in the party is for certain seats, for a councillor as well as an MP, they're reserved for women. And what that's helped to do is really narrow the gap between the number of male and female councillors that we historically had, as well as the gap on MPs. Don't quote me on these stats, but I think at the moment within the Labour Party, we still have a lot more councillors who are male and a lot less that are female. MPs, I think the last cut that I saw from the last election was we're about 50-50 now for male and female MPs. So that's been done through positive discrimination. That's sometimes what it takes. And I believe going forward, coming out of the discussions, again in terms of tangible actions, the government should enshrine in law positive discrimination for BAME applicants going in for senior positions in some of those boardrooms in the NHS, in the police, in local government, in government itself, as well as private organisations. So we've seen how it can work. We've seen how positive discrimination can work through for rights for women, and I think we should now adopt that model for BAME applicants across different sectors. And you go about getting that done through lobbying, through mobilising, through movements, through really getting involved in that democratic process. And I do have faith that certainly within the UK, if we raise our voices united as part of a movement, we can bring about change. I do have faith in that process.
Thank you very much for that. Positive discrimination. A lot of people react negatively to it, but what I want to say about that,
they say, so 1 second, Michelle, they say stuff like we should ask for, all you can ask for is equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. So please address that tripe in your response, if you don't mind, Michelle.
Well, yeah. So the tribe really around this positive discrimination thing, it's not a BAME thing, because the reason why we see the statistics that you just is because that system has used positive discrimination to only employ white people. Do you understand? So that is a nice rebuttal to anyone who wants to say now that positive discrimination for BAME is wrong, because the system has always used positive discrimination for white people to get to where they to appoint them. Would you all agree with that or not? What is your response to that?
I'll let the councillor take the question first.
Michelle, just in terms of the specific example I gave was in regards to the Labour Party. So that wasn't, for example, white women. It was open to...
No. I understand that. So I'm just saying positive discrimination. I'm not criticizing
what she's saying is... Okay, sorry, carry on. Go on, Michelle.
Positive discrimination. So it's a rebuttal to anyone who wants to argue against positive discrimination for BAME people or even for women. The fact is, this thing called positive discrimination has always been used, which is why we are seeing. So it's been used to the advantage of non-BAME people or men, because the employers, the interview panels have always positively discriminated for white people to be employed or men to be employed. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Right, I got it. Okay, fine. So yeah,
right.
I take the point. But what I'm that positive discrimination, Michelle, that you're talking about has happened without any law change. That's just people's own behaviour and preference choices.
That's
Whereas
right.
What I'm talking about in terms of positive discrimination is, literally enforcing it in law.
I think you're both on the same page. What Michelle, because I asked the question, I said, because I hear this a lot. I hear it from non-BAME people, and I also hear it from BAME people as well. Like I said, I know I have quite a few BAME colleagues, friends, people who I care about very much, and many of whom I respect highly, who have a problem with someone like me seemingly being a quote-unquote civil rights activist. They prefer me to stick to my Bible. I do tell them I'm getting my civil rights activism from my Bible, but that's another conversation. And one of the common, I use the word tripe a little bit naughtily, but one of the common phrases I hear is, you can't demand equal outcomes. You can only demand equal opportunity. In essence, what they're saying is, because it is no longer legal to directly discriminate on grounds of race, in essence, you cannot legally outwardly say, I will not give this job to a black person, or we won't allow black people in this restaurant. They're saying, there you go. We've legislated it. Martin Luther King won the fight in the UK, in the US. Mandela won it in South Africa. It's now illegal to be outwardly racist. My response would be what you both have just said. Like what Michelle said is, you cannot legislate human heart behavior. Okay, you can legislate the behavior, but you can't legislate the human heart. So the fact that I say something's illegal doesn't mean the person is not going to find a way to do it unless I close all the legal loopholes. And so the answer to that person would be, well, that's Michelle's answer. That was what she was saying. Her answer is, there is positive discrimination going on anyway. It's just against black people. So what's wrong with legalizing the counterbalance? Now, having said that, I do understand that it is a slippery slope. So I want to tell anybody watching me who has a problem with it, I'll give you that. It is a very slippery slope, because where do you draw the line is what I've heard some people ask, and that's a conversation we can have another day. Do we get to a point where you have to hire a black person or an Asian person, even though they're nowhere near as qualified for it as the white applicant? But I'm sure we're all intelligent human beings here. We're all, where there's goodwill and common sense, there will be ways around crafting whatever legislation or system Councillor Khan was talking about. But we've got 5 more minutes to go, so we have to. This has been an amazing conversation, by the way, and I wish we could go on much longer, but I know we're all busy, and maybe we will have to do this again some other time. Councillor Khan, I will take you up on your offer. You will be hearing from my office over the next few days as to how we can work together on some of the things you suggested. But
So
I
just
said
want to
this.
say one quick
Go on.
thing, if I
Go
may.
on, Michelle.
So
Your
we're
voice is a
talking
bit
about
low, so if you
this.
could take your volume up a bit, that'd be great.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I had to plug my phone in because the charger was going down. So I've taken my
That's
headphones
fine.
off. Oh, this is better. But anyway, so what I wanted to say is that, we had acknowledged that this is a societal issue more than organizations struggling with this issue.
Yep.
And I just wanted to put the example of politics. So just recently, I read that Dawn Butler, who's a Labour MP for many, many years here in Brent, she had to close her office because of the level of racist attacks, people smashing in the windows all the time, people coming in and abusing her staff, and so on. So I just thought that's an interesting thing. And she's not the first BAME politician, a senior politician at that, who has said that they've received death threats. I think, so many of them have come out to say that they are also on the receiving end of racist abuse in the system. So that's just, it's not for an answer, it's just to highlight that this is also rife in politics itself.
Israel, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't hear you before either.
Okay, so I said I agree. Couldn't agree anymore. And these are conversations that need to carry on. And for anybody wondering why I do this show, it's just to let a group of people know, people who I interact with, people of faith, people of color, and the intersection of those two groups, that these issues are there. So these shows are not designed to answer all the questions, solve all the problems. They're designed to indoctrinate you into the conversation and inspire you to go on and be a part of that conversation any way you can be. So for instance, go find out who your local councillor is. Get their email address. Get their office phone number, not their personal one. Don't stalk them. Get their office phone number. Agitate. Hold them accountable. In communities and in groups, get together and enunciate clear, lucid policy agendas. And don't vote, and I'm just going to say it as I feel it, don't vote based on party. Don't say I'm a Labour voter or I'm a Conservative voter. No, vote the policy and the person on the ballot. Check out their record, ask them questions, look at their portfolio or their manifesto is what I'm looking for, right? And then when they get in power, tell them you're on a 4-year, Councillor Khan, no disrespect to you, you're on a 4-year rolling contract, right? So you got 4 years, work starts the day after we elect you. We are taking note of whether or not you follow up on your promises. And if just as a protest vote, if you take our vote for granted this time, we will protest vote you out next time. These are some of the ways in which we can start to apply some pressure. But like I said 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, when we had actually it's a month ago. Yeah, it's over a month ago now. The week of the George Floyd incident. People of minority descent need 4 things. 4 things. First, we need to organize. And by organize, I don't mean organize protests or marches or riots. I mean organize an agenda. What is it we need/want? We need to make it clear. We need to have conversations, think tanks. We need to make it clear, number 1. The second thing we need is to communicate. Not just project, communicate. So you can get attention by smashing a window. After you smash that window and you have that person's attention, what you say next really matters. And don't smash the window. I'm not saying go smash it. I'm saying beyond the noise, beyond the acts of anger, beyond the outpourings, beyond the riots, beyond the peaceful legal protests, beyond the movement, beyond the hashtags, can we present a clear, lucid, intelligent, communicated position that is actionable? The third thing we need is representation. I gave this stat about a month and a half ago. This was even before George Floyd. That of the 1,094, 96 senators in U.S. history, only 10 have been black. And of those 10 that were black, Barack Obama was one, and the other three others are serving right now. So in the last 15, 20 years, we've had almost half of all the black senators in U.S. history. Let that sink in for a second. We've just seen the Snowy White Peaks report that says we have 2.5 of our NHS chief execs are BAME, not just black now. You put us all in the soup, in the alphabet soup. Black, Asian, all of us put together, all non-white. And the BAME is a very diverse coalition, which is one of the issues some people have some people say when you lump us all together, you dilute the issues. Well, that may have some truth to it, but you put us all together and we're 2.5% governing a national health system in a country we make up or in a city, we make up 45% of. So we need representation.
Yeah.
And finally, when we do send that representation to positions of influence, we need to keep them accountable. When we send that representation, I just lost my video for a second. When we send that representation, we need to keep them accountable. So when we get there, for those of us who will get there, we need to make sure that we're competent at what we do, that we're not just a token NEGRO if you're black or whatever other nationality you're from. You're not the token person who's being put there just to satisfy a requirement, but that you actually know what you're doing, you know what you're saying, and we're as a community, we're holding those people accountable, but we're not judging them just by what they do for us, because I heard that all the while through a certain president's tenure. It's not, that person's not there just to serve BAME people. We also have to give them the space to do their job. Those are my final remarks. I'm going to open up the floor to I have, by the way, I have asked the questions that I was sent in stylishly without calling the people because of time. So some of my points earlier on were people's questions. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Khan for some closing remarks, and then Michelle, and then we're going to sign off today. Councillor Khan, over to you.
Israel, thanks. So just really from me, just to say thank you for inviting me on. I agree with what you just said in terms of 4 points. I think in terms of organising, that is the key going forward. I think there's something about organising, there's something about persistence, and there's something about that scrutiny point. I think that's really, really important going forward. Again, my offer to anyone who wants to sort of get an insight into the council life process, how to get involved, happy to run you through that. And really, it's been a pleasure. Good to speak to you, Israel and Michelle. Insightful conversations. I hope your viewers enjoyed it, and happy to do this sometime again in the future if it be helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Israel, for inviting me on here. It was a pleasure, and it was really stimulating and interesting. And thank you very much, Councillor Khan, for your participation as well and your views that you've shared. We appreciate the work that you're doing as a councillor. I know it's challenging, very challenging, working in the public sector, especially as an elected official. I have nothing to add. I think that Israel's roundup was perfect with the points that he raised. And thank you very much for having me. And I do hope that everyone enjoyed the discussion and was inspired by it to keep pressing on with regards to not just BAME issues, but also to your own life and to your own potential, and ensuring that you are able to release that potential as best that you can.
So awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. Councillor Khan, thank you for making up the time to come here. Michelle, thank you for taking up the invitation at short notice. It's been an amazing conversation. I promise on my part, and I said this over a month and a half ago, and I'm still saying it now. When all the rhetoric has died down, I'll be here doing my job. So when it's no longer cool to put up a fist and put up a hashtag when everybody is done marching and occupying and all that, and everybody else wants to go back to their normal life, I'll be here, right, doing my part to do the difficult work. I will reach out, Councillor Khan, like you said. Thank you for that. I will take you up on that offer. So I now have offers from yourself, from the DCS in Waltham Forest and Newham, from another councillor in the borough. So I'm putting together my coalition that I can go to hopefully do my part in bringing some change to the environment and the time we live in. So everybody, thank you so much. Right, I've missed one question, but it's 3 o'clock. I missed a very important question. Somebody wanted to know what's the council doing to address inequalities and outcomes for public health. For example, what services are being targeted at black communities, knowing black people face worse outcomes? Is there funding to support black communities, promote health within black communities? Councillor Khan, do you have a 30-second answer to that question?
So not enough is being done. That's my answer. I don't think we've targeted funding at particular groups in the way that it should have been based on the evidence. And I think, again, that's something we need to get smarter at going forward. So I think we've just not targeted the funding in relation to that.
Awesome. Appreciate that. God bless you, everybody. Have an amazing rest of the week. We will see you same time, same platform, YouTube or Facebook next week for the Kingdom in Motion. Take care. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.